totally unsafe and unstable. How can they motivate their teams to stay in the company, keep their spirit high? Wow. Great question. And yes, in that particular example, that would be very challenging. When you've got a very unsafe and very unstable environment as a manager, having those direct, open conversations where you're letting folks know what you do and do not control, showing up as a human being, showing empathy, can be really helpful. And helping folks stay in the company, keep their spirit high. I'm just being honest here. There might be a period when that's just really difficult. And it's a period of uncertainty, and keeping spirits high might not be possible given all of the uncertainty, but helping people know that you're there, and that you're going to be a resource for each other could be really helpful. I'm curious if other folks in the class have any additional comments they'd like to share there or insights. Please go ahead and post them into the chat. Thank you for that question. Next question, do your fundamental strengths stay the same throughout your life? So there's a yes and answer here. I love the question. So in my experience, your strengths do tend to stay pretty constant throughout your life. And that doesn't mean you can't grow and develop in areas that you might not have grown and developed in. So what makes me reply in that way is, as a certified strengths coach through Gallup, I've had people take the assessment and they get the rank order of the 34 talents as described by Gallup. And what folks are told is to focus on the top 10. And what people have told me over time is if they take the assessment multiple times, maybe different contexts over the span of a couple of years, is that a strength in their 6 through 10 might bubble up to their 1 through 5. Something in 11 through 12 might bump into 7 or 8. So there is some fluidity there. But what I've never seen, again, looking at this rank order of 34, is something in somebody's bottom 10 or 12 pop up to their top 10 or 12. I've never seen that. So there's a lot of, there's who you are as a person and what drives you and motivates you. And we are capable of incredible growth and development and change over time. So it's a bit of a yes and answer to that question. Another question, how much should I spend on a new area to know if it is a weakness, like doing presentations? So thinking about, let's take something like presentations. This is where the strengths innovation could come into play. Because I remember presenting. Presenting for me, this was when I was out of college, 20 some years ago. I was petrified of public speaking. But I recognized it was something that I should get better at and I wanted to get better at. So instead of saying, well, this is a weakness, I shouldn't focus on it, there was something inside me wanted to get better at it. So again, I went back to my strengths. What am I good at? What do I enjoy? I enjoy going to a workshop. I enjoy learning with other people. I've got discipline. I could stick to a practice schedule here and I could probably get better. So I decided, in my particular circumstance, to sign up for a Toastmasters group. Great organization, toastmasters.org, if getting better presentations is something you'd like to focus on. That was back in 1998. I did that for 2 or 3 years. Fantastic environment, and really built a lot of skills. So to answer the question, how much time should I spend on your area? Is it an area you want to get better at? You want to achieve mastery? If so, you might not have the explicit strength, but how might you use your existing strengths in an innovative way to get better at that thing? So that's a little bit of a Jedi move on the strengths, if you will. Okay, please do go ahead and pop any additional questions that you might have into the chat. And if we've got time at the end, I'll answer a few more as well. I did want to spend a little bit of time checking in on a quiz here. So what do you think? Yes or no? Autonomy is an integral part of an employee's motivation. Is that a yes or a no? A yes. So think back to the Dan Pink model, Autonomy, mastery, purpose. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. This next question, it wasn't part of the course so far, but I'm curious what you think, and then I can introduce some additional data. So if people are paid a fair salary, they are motivated. What do you think? Yes or no? If people are paid a fair salary, they are motivated. A fair salary, essentially it's a hygiene factor. So if I know that for my level of expertise in my particular industry, I am paid a fair salary, it doesn't mean I'm particularly motivated, but I'm not demotivated, just as MD said. However, if I'm working in a particular industry with the level of expertise that I have, and I know that this person down the hallway or in another part of the company is doing essentially the same thing, and they're being paid more, or if there are people in other organizations being paid more for the exact same skill level and output that I have in my job, then that is demotivating. That is demotivating. So, and then it can be really challenging as a manager if you're focusing on autonomy, mastery, and purpose without having that baseline of a fair salary. So the fair salary is it's the building block, I would say, upon which those other three areas are built. So yes or no, I can create conditions for motivation as a manager. Yes or no, I can create the conditions for motivation as a manager. Back to the Dan Pick model, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. On that slide, AF, are examples of how you might be able to create the conditions for motivation. So in the purpose side of things, am I helping to translate the organization's purpose to a particular job function, etc.? How can I help my employees see the purpose inherent in their work? The mastery, am I providing those opportunities for folks to really gain mastery over their work? And am I understanding the 3 laws of mastery? And then on the autonomy side of things, can I give autonomy, as much autonomy as possible, with time, with technique, with task, with team, how the work gets done, when it gets done, and with whom it gets done. So you've got a lot of purview there, and you can set up, and there is a fair amount, in the majority of organizations, you can create those conditions for motivation as a manager. And yes, JP, this should be one of our primary jobs as a manager. So I mentioned the 3 laws of mastery. Is pain one of those 3 laws? Yes or no? Is pain one of those 3 laws of mastery? Think back to any time you've tried to master something yourself. Was pain part of the deal? The 3 laws of mastery. We have mindset, pain, and asymptote. The fact that there is no finish line. Thank you. Next question. Employees' motivation levels are not impacted by whether or not someone cares for them at work. Is that a yes or a no? Employees' motivation levels are not. Final question in the quiz here. Does providing choice along with accountability increase an employee's motivation? So does providing choice increase an employee's motivation? Is that a yes or a no? Okay. Yes, absolutely. Providing choice where you can increases an employee's motivation. And we talked about choice around how the work gets done. So the time, the technique, the task, the team, that really does help increase an employee's motivation a lot. Alrighty, I wanted to take some time to give you time to reflect on what you've learned so far. Because again, we're building the reflections and building as we go throughout the 4 sessions here. And then during session 4, Jenny will lead you on a review.
And you'll see this a couple of times during the course, because we think it's really important to come back and kind of touch base on this. So there is kind of a myth and misconception of being the boss. And we like to contrast that myth with the reality of what it really takes. And I remember the first time I had a leadership role, and I expected things to kind of magically get better. And they actually magically got worse. So rather than people automatically listening to me and seeking my guidance and looking for me to set the direction, a lot of what I dealt with in an early leadership role was people treating me differently, not telling me things they would normally tell me in the past. Less communication. I felt less connected to the team initially. And unlike all of you, I didn't have any training at that point. I was figuring it all out on my own. And it took some time, honestly. So let's look at this. I probably believed more in the myths, and it's really important to understand the reality. So just to remind us, the myth is, now I will have the freedom to implement my ideas. Boy, I bought into that one, and it didn't work at all. I'll finally be at the top of the ladder. I must get compliance from my subordinates. So here you are saying, I'm going to implement your ideas. Nobody's listening. Well, let's go make them do it, right? These are all myths. These don't work. My role is to build relationships with my individual subordinates, and my job is to make sure the operation runs smoothly. Okay, so these things aren't completely wrong, but they can't be your main focus. And so if you can move to the right-hand side of this slide, think about interdependency. It's humbling that someone who works for me could get me fired. Wow. Folks are wary. You have to earn that authority. Compliance is not commitment. And what we really want is people who are committed to the work, who aren't just punching the clock, but are really coming in, sharing their ideas, driving the work forward. You do not want to be the head of a group that's all dragging their feet or sitting down while you're trying to move forward. You need to create a culture that's going to allow the group to fulfill its potential. And you're responsible for initiating changes that enhance the group's performance. You may have heard a leadership style called servant leadership. And this is an example of servant leadership where your conversation is, what can I do to support you? What barriers could I help get out of your way? What resources do you need? What do you need from me? Completely different focus. All right, so we're going to do a quiz, and I want to hear a little bit about how you feel about power as the ability to get adequate resources and to be able to get resources and move your ideas forward in your organization. All right, well, let's look. So quite a few of you see it as an important tool, and a few of you see it as a necessary evil, and a lot of you are neutral. I'm hoping that by the end of the session, more of you will see it as an important tool. As I said, there's not a right or wrong answer, and you may not agree with me, but that's kind of where I see it. There's a video, and this is one of the resources at the end of this program, of two Harvard Business School professors. They're talking about it, and one of the professors says he used to think power was not helpful, not something that he should be concerned with, until he realized that it's actually powerlessness that often puts people in the most difficult position because they can't say no. Very interesting thought. Okay, one more. So we saw the results from that. Got another survey, and a couple of you have none. And for those of you who feel like you have no power in your role, I hope that also changes, because even if you don't have formal authority, you probably have more power than you realize. All right, so let's dig into this further. So how we come to power, how we use power in organizations is something that's been discussed literally for centuries. So here are two quotes that are quite nice about power. One is from Abraham Lincoln. Nearly all men or women can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man or woman's character, give him or her power, right? So how you handle power is a test of your character. And this is probably a reframe of a much older quote from ancient Greece. The measure of a man or woman is what he or she does with power. So this is something that we have known about and watched for millennia. So here's the definition of power that we'll use in this class. And this is a very technical definition, but it's also a helpful one, right? Power is the potential to mobilize energy in an organization. And the energy might be resources, might be people's time, might be people's enthusiasm. And we know that organizations consist of interdependent individuals and groups with divergent interests. What does that mean? That means that your group and the group that depends on you for some part of their work might not have the exact same interests in mind, right? So this may be across different parts of the organization. So for example, if you're in a software Scrum team and you've got the marketing people who want to put up their latest option for customers, hopefully you're aligned that you're developing that code that's needed to do the website update, but they may have a very different timeline than you. Or they may not realize what they really need, or they may change something along the way. So there's often tension between what different groups hold as in terms of their interests. And so power determines the goals a group will pursue and the distribution of resources. So it's the ability to influence another group or another person so that they act in according to your interests. Now, interestingly, power does not have to be used to be present. So you can have a great deal of power and hold it back. And this is a good thing to do in general. If you hold power and use it only when you really need it, that can actually create a stronger place. And power has a dependency relationship. You only have power if the other person or group has something that you desire, right? So these are the kind of high-level definitions of power. And I love what's going on in the chat in terms of the different suggestions, because it is very broad. And as I said, we're going to spend time on it today, and we're going to spend time on it next week. Okay, here is something very important. Power itself, in and of itself, or power and influence, are not inherently ethical or unethical. It's people and processes and values that are ethical. And so in order to use power ethically, you have to think about what is the right or wrong decision. How do I align this use of power with values? So using power in and of itself is neither good nor bad, but how it's used by an individual in a situation is going to be either ethical or unethical. And so we don't want to talk about power without reminding people that you need to think about, is what I'm doing ethical? What would others say about my use of power? Is it aligned to business objectives? Is it aligned to organizational objectives? If someone described this in the New York Times, would they think I did the right thing? Right? So never forget that as we think about power and how we build power and how we use power in our organizations, it needs to go through this filter of, is it ethical, what I'm doing? So what are some of the things that happen when a manager doesn't have power? And if you see yourself or your group in this situation, that may be an indication that you need to build your power. You don't have enough right now. So one thing is that problems can go unresolved. There can be disagreements that consistently get resolved against your wishes. So in spite of advocating for your position or your group's position, that position is not not able to move forward. You get incomplete or inaccurate information. People misperceive and misunderstand your group. People distract your people because no one negotiates, filters, or mediates outside pressure. Your people lack the resources they need. And maybe even your people think you're letting them down. As a manager, if you're incompetent and lacking in character, you may not be providing them with what they need. Wow. So one of the frames of power is that you need power as a leader of a group or a team. You need power in order to support that team, to get the resources you need, to get the visibility you need, and to get the support inside of the organization. So the importance of building your own power, and we're going to talk about how you do that in just a little bit, is really around being able to advocate for your group and get your group what it needs to be successful. All right, so I'm going to ask you to do a reflection. Please write down your answers to these. You can write it down in a word processing document or a notepad, or you can write it on paper if you like. But I'd like you to take 3 or 4, get it's important, particularly if I'm the leader of a group, in order to support the group and push the group's work forward, get enough resources. I love the comments about the amount of time, managing workloads too. We didn't talk about that specifically, but that came out very nicely in the chat. So how do you build your power? How do you build your power? What do you guys think about how you build your power? I'd love to see some comments in the chat. Any ideas on how to build your power? I saw an earlier comment that information was power. How would you build your power? What do you think? How would you build your power? Prove yourself? Yep. Yep. Relationships. Lead by example. Follow through. Be an expert. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. That's right. Okay. So we're going to talk about 3 types of individual power. We're going to talk about personal power. We're going to talk about personal power, power that comes from who you are as an individual. We're going to talk about positional power, power that comes from your place in the organization. And we're going to talk about relational power, power that comes through the relationships that you build with others. So what are some examples of personal power? And as I talk through these, I'd like you to take notes for yourself on 1 or 2 or 3 things that you might do that would enhance your personal power. What are some things that would enhance your personal power? So one area you can enhance your personal power. So think about what resonates most for you. And I might ask you that. One is creating cooperation between groups. How interesting. So personal power isn't just about you. In fact, it's not about you at all. It's partly about you, but it's also about how you create cooperation. So having the ability to understand the beliefs and behaviors of others, submerging your ego, being able to consider the interests of others, and flexibility, the ability to adapt your style and position, right? So creating cooperation. If we take that back to a strengths perspective, it's about what strengths do you have that help connect others and help others succeed? That's part of your personal power. Winning. We talked about that. This came up in the chat quite a bit. People with high energy and stamina, people with focus, people who can tolerate conflict when conflict is appropriate, and having that expertise and self-confidence. So this piece, this middle column, is really the all about you. And that's good. These things count. So if you're a person with energy and focus and expertise, and you can tolerate conflict, those are all ways to build your personal power. And so the third one is about gaining support. And this can be support from your peers, support from your team, support from your superiors, from your bosses, right? So part of gaining support can be charisma, attractiveness. People want to identify with you. They like who you are. They respect you. It can be your communication skills, your ability to communicate your position and be persuasive, and your track record, how well you've done in the past. Now, any of these things could be a part, if not all, of a short course, right? So communication in particular, how you build your communication skills, there's a lot of information and content out there. And if that's something that you're interested in, you can build a tolerance for conflict and how to manage conflict. Again, that's something you would like to build for yourself. How might you do that? I'm interested, so I asked you at the beginning when I started going through this slide of what are things you might do to enhance your personal power. Are there things that you could share that you're inspired by or feel are important on this list? Go ahead and put those in the group chat. What might you do differently to enhance your personal power? Let's see some ideas of things that resonate. That's nice, AC. Great idea. Mm-hmm. Be persuasive. Develop your persuasiveness. Communication, the ability to persuade and communicate well, is something you will continue to develop across your career. Everyone has to develop that. It is a skill that's learned. Nice. Great. Tolerate conflict when conflict is appropriate. That's a hard one for people. You know, our basic approach to conflict often comes from our families. So if you're someone who naturally avoids conflict or is uncomfortable with conflict, often that comes from early experiences where that was a good strategy for you. And as we grow and become professionals, understanding that some conflict is productive, some disagreement is productive, is a really important skill. Okay. All right. So we talked about personal power. Let's talk about positional power. And so positional power is a couple of different things. So when I say the word positional power, everyone thinks of the formal position. That's that authority, applying or withholding incentives, giving informal rewards. And as I said, that's not all of leadership. That's not all of what you need to do, but it is a piece of it. It's not a 0 either. It's not a 10. It's not a 0. It's probably around a 3 in terms of its importance. And here are two other areas. Around building your positional power. One is how you control resources and how you mete those out, right? And it's very important to realize as you move into a manager position that whether or not you're sensitive to the fact that you're controlling resources that other people need, other people are going to be very sensitive to that. And the resources may be concrete things, server time or access to people, and it may be less concrete things like how you manage scheduling on your projects, right? And then the third part of positional power, and this is really this often has as much to do with your individual characteristics and how people perceive you, particularly leadership perceives you or perceives your project. which is your relevance and your visibility. Is the task that you're working on or your team is working on connected to the organizational objectives? And to what degree can your performance be seen by others? And this is something that you first have to define for yourself, and then you might have to actively pursue. There's a question in the chat that I'll go ahead and answer, which is how can we develop charisma? So it's interesting. One of the ways to develop charisma is to be yourself, be your best self. In the most you can. Be your best self the most you can. So if your best self is thoughtful and a good listener, that works for charisma. If your best self is a spokesperson, do that. If your best self is bringing happiness or joy or laughter to a situation, do that. So think about what your skills are. What are those unique things that other people value in you, and be that best self as much as you possibly can. And that will be a way that you can develop your charisma in your organization. So question on institutionalizing of resource dependency. So let me explain that. Institutionalization of resource dependency would be formalizing. So this is actually, this example is often used in a negative way. You have to be careful about it. But it would be, for example, formalizing a process formalizing an approval process so that everyone would have to seek your approval before doing a certain thing. Or it could be, so often institutionalization of resource dependency is process-based. It could be creating a form or a process before people are able to gain additional resources. It could be pushing something up to leadership. So institutionalization of resource dependency is basically saying putting a process or procedure in place that forces people to use that process to get something they need. Okay, good. Thank you for your question. I appreciate that. All right, so question. You know this question is coming. How might you better use your positional power? What on this list are things that you might be able to do in your role that would enhance your positional power? What are some examples inspired by this list that might enhance your positional power? Go ahead and put those in the chat.